So I want to start out though by asking you to think about for a moment what friction looks like in your organization. When you hear organizational friction or AI friction, what comes to mind? It could be communication issues, or it could be alignment issues, or it could be outright open conflict, any number of things. But just think for a moment in your particular organization what that really looks like. Because I think the reality of it is that when you look at friction in organizations, just like in the realm of physics, it's that resistance that slows people down, that prevents movement, and it builds in organizations when you have people, structures, and processes that aren't aligned, and that causes the whole business to slow down. It causes your AI initiatives to slow down, and also for execution to break down. And there's a real cost to that as well. Because when you look at some of the numbers around it, about 61% of enterprise companies report that they're not seeing AI hit the EBIT line. So they're doing all of this activity. Almost every organization out there has embraced AI to some degree, but they're not seeing the impact in the P&L, and that's the problem. 61% are struggling with execution and realization on their AI investment. At the same time, 64% of organizations, enterprise level organizations, $1 billion and up, have suffered at least $1 million of losses from negative AI events. And that is a huge number. And when you couple that with the idea that the average AI negative incident cost about $4.4 million, according to Ernst & Young, I mean, those are staggering numbers when you look at how AI done ineffectively can cost an organization, both in terms of the productivity that you're not realizing, but also in terms of the negative penalties that you're seeing from AI negative events. And a lot of that is traced back to friction in organization. When you have misalignment, when you have execution breakdowns, that's how it shows up on the back end. So now when you think about how that happens, the friction actually happens on three different fronts. And the first of those is structural. And we see this an awful lot in organizations, where IT has the ownership around AI within the company. They're making all the decisions, yet other functions within the business have to live with the consequences. And the result is a lot of tension. A recent study from earlier this year from Laridan indicates that almost 60% of companies cite fragmented or ownership as their number one issue that's slowing down realizing AI performance. And that is a huge number. So that's on the structural piece. Now, when you look at it from the directional piece, really having an aligned strategy in place, that's another area where we see a lot of organizations being very challenged right now. Because, quite clearly, most companies have a strategy. Most companies even have an AI strategy. But according to some earlier data from earlier this year from Writer AI, about 75% of C-suite and employees recognize that their strategy is more for show than for real guidance on execution. And we see that all the time because there are so many companies that will say, hey, we've rolled out Copilot, that's our strategy, but they haven't really defined what are we doing with AI? How do we create value from it? What are the expectations for employees? How will it transform the business? That's the miss that we're seeing generally across those organizations that are struggling with AI. And then the third thing that you have to deal with in terms of friction is the cultural piece. And we often see that leadership teams will announce, here's what we're doing with AI, but they haven't asked anyone deeper in the organization. They haven't enrolled employees through the process. And employees are actively resisting AI adoption right now. This is also from the same writer survey from earlier this year, that about 29% of employees admit to actively sabotaging their company's AI efforts. And they're doing so for a number of different reasons. It's either that They're concerned that their job's going to be replaced by AI. They don't like the tools that the organization is rolling out for them. They've got other things that they like that are more productive from their point of view. They don't feel like their concerns are being heard. They don't feel like they have the training in place to make it effective. Or some of the other things, like they just conceptually or philosophically are opposed to AI. A whole bunch of different reasons that flow into that. But long story short, there's a pocket that you need to deal with inside your organization in terms of shaping the culture so that everybody's on board with AI adoption. So those are three things that you really need to think about in terms of why friction happens, or dimensions that you need to consider when it comes to AI friction. And so, last slide that I'm going to share for the moment, I just want to talk about three things that you can do to address that, really quickly, and something that you can do in the next 30 days. Number one is just starting with some small sounding sessions with groups of employees. We find that 8 to 12 employees talking about what the leadership team is doing on AI, and then hearing, more importantly, from employees, how are they feeling about it? What are their concerns? What do they believe will help them be more productive in their roles? A very simple step, executing this across the organization can make a huge difference. And then, just as a side note, one of the things that we find with this is that it not only helps with AI friction, but it also helps uncover other issues that may be lurking inside the organization that have not yet really been addressed. That's the thing that you need to think about in terms of how this can be a very powerful thing. Second thing that you can do in the next 30 days, conduct a portfolio review and just look at every AI initiative that you have running in your company and evaluate whether it's mapped to a business critical metric. Because the reality is that there are these companies that will say, hey, everybody should be using AI, go out and figure out ways to make it work. That's the shotgun approach. But in reality, unless you have focused momentum behind an initiative, it's hard to make it show up in the financials. And the example that I use all the time is that you think about sunlight. You walk outside and you feel the sun on you, and it feels nice and warm. But that's very different from taking a magnifying glass, focusing that sunlight, and then you can actually set something on fire with that. That's the thing about being very strategic and surgical about your AI initiatives, and getting clear about what you need to fix, what you need to scale, and what you need to kill. And then the third action you can take in the next 30 days is being clear about business ownership. I mean that from the perspective of, yes, AI is definitely going to be involved, or the IT team will definitely be involved. They're going to enable whatever is there, but there should be another functional business owner that has the outcome and is making decisions about what's needed in terms of the requirements to make it work. So just one name, one metric, one sponsor, and ideally, all of these are aligned to priorities within the organization. That's how it works. Now, that's three quick things that you can do. And just to kind of share an example, we've done this with our clients. And just to share one example, we did this with mid-market technical services company. It was a situation where very common where you had an IT leader, CIO, that was making all of the decisions about AI. It was in her purview. And to make matters worse, they were in the middle of a CEO transition at the time. And so there wasn't really a CEO to kind of a referee between all the other C-suite heads there. And they were really in a tug of war about what they were doing with AI. And so that was a case where we started with those small focus groups. We did 7 of those across the organization. And collectively, we heard a lot from employees. We heard that, hey, they didn't like Copilot, that they preferred another tool for their primary mechanism. They didn't feel like they've been trained enough on the technology to make it effective. They weren't clear on what leadership's intent was, because they still had this idea that they were just putting all of these productivity things in place to reduce headcount. And then also they had some ideas about what they would see as being value added, for their particular role in their particular function. So we did those small group sessions, and we took that back to the leadership team. And then we had a session with just that group to review not only the initiatives that were already ongoing, but also to review the ideas that came out from the employee sessions. And out of that, we really aligned on just a couple priorities. And for this one, we started with looking at manufacturing, repair, and maintenance. So that was one area where AI could provide a tremendous value. And then the other area was on the month-end closing process. That was another one where there was a lot of waste there that they felt that they could be very effective in rolling out AI. And so they selected owners for both of those initiatives, built out the team, reviewed those things on a monthly cadence, and made some really good traction in terms of seeing the benefit of AI in those areas. Now, on the closing process, as a side note, they were able to cut that down from 14 days to 7 days. So huge improvement there, just with the adoption of AI in just a very, very simple way. So that's all I wanted to share in terms of slides. First of all, thanks for joining the conversation today. Really appreciate the discussion and the questions that are out there. If this is a conversation that you think really needs to be had inside your organization, give us a shout, and we're happy to do an encore discussion inside your organization. Also, if you're in the process of an initiative or you're looking to get a little bit of support around that, happy to be a sounding board. Let's get some time on the calendar and talk that through. Or if you'd like to learn more about our capabilities at Root Idea and everything that we're engaged with, as I mentioned before, we do a lot of work on decision governance specifically, but just putting all the controls in place around AI. We also do a lot of strategy work and training to support those things as well. But happy to talk with you more about that, just so you have a resource in your hip pocket should the need arise. So with that, I just want to say thanks again and wish you all a great rest of the week.